So, after the version livestream, we finally have confirmed information about all the characters that are arriving in the next patch, among which we have Acheron, one of the most hyped characters to ever get released in Honkai Star Rail. I've already made a few videos about her, but this one is going to be the final nail in the head. In this video, we're going to cover everything, starting with a full detailed explanation of her kit, followed by her Eidolons, some build options, proper rotations, and finish it off with some potential synergies. Do leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Without further ado, let's talk about Acheron. Starting off with an overview, Acheron is a lightning nihility main DPS with a unique playstyle. She does incredible damage and is quite formidable in both single target and AoE situations. Her base stats are nothing special when it comes to HP and defense, but she has unusually high base attack for a nihility character. She has decent 101 speed and uniquely does not need any energy to perform her ultimate. I'll talk more about that in a bit. Moving on to her traces, her basic is nothing special, it's the usual stuff. Deals a bit of lightning damage to a single target. Her skill is a blast attack that deals lightning damage to 3 targets and inflicts the main target in the middle with 1 stack of Crimson Knot. Only to the main target, not all 3. Also, she herself gains 1 point of Slash Dream. Now this point system is gonna tell when she uses her ultimate. To understand this better, we need to look at her talent. Acheron's talent allows her to use her ultimate when she accumulates 9 points of Slash Dream. So she doesn't consume any kind of energy, but relies on this point system to activate her ultimate. This talent also reduces the enemy's resistance by 20% for the duration of the ultimate, and allows the ultimate to deal colorless damage, which if you don't know what it means that this attack will reduce the enemy's toughness regardless of their elemental type, similar to the 4-star character Shuei's ultimate. Since Acheron doesn't use any energy and relies on her point system, it's very important to maximize how fast she gains point. And other than her skill, there are other ways to accumulate points. When any unit in the team inflicts a debuff on an enemy using their ability, Acheron will gain 1 point of Slash Dream and inflicts 1 stack of Crimson Knot to the target. If the debuff is inflicted on multiple targets, the amount of points she gains won't change, but the Crimson Knot will be inflicted on the enemy with the most stacks. Lastly, if an enemy gets defeated while they have Crimson Knot stacks on them, then those stacks will be transferred to the enemy with the most stacks. Finally, her ultimate. It's a chain of single target attack with an AoE attack at the end. Acheron unleashes 3 rain blades on a single target of your choosing, dealing lightning damage, and removes 3 Crimson Knot stacks from the target. When a stack of Crimson Knot is removed from an enemy, Acheron deals lightning damage to all enemies. And for every stack of Crimson Knot removed, the damage multiplier is additionally increased. After she uses her 3 rain blades, she finishes off with an AoE attack called Stygian Research, dealing lightning damage to all enemies and also removes all remaining Crimson Knot stacks from them. In total, it all comes down to a stupid amount of damage, probably the most damage we have seen yet in a single attack. Lastly, for her technique, she immediately attacks the enemy, and if the enemy is not an elite or boss monster, she instantly defeats them without entering combat, which is one of the most insane things I've ever seen. But if the target is not a normal enemy, then she will enter combat dealing lightning damage to all the enemies, reducing their toughness regardless of their element, and she will gain Quadrivalent Ascendance, which after she uses her ultimate, it allows her to gain 1 point of Slash Dream and inflicts 1 stack of Crimson Knot to a single random target. Moving on to Acheron's passive, her first passive makes it so that when the battle starts, she immediately gains 5 points of Slash Dream and applies 5 stack of Crimson Knot to a random enemy. It's similar to how every other character starts off with some energy when the battle starts. Also, if the amount of points obtained exceeds the limit, that is 9 points, then for every extra points, Acheron will gain 1 stack of Quadrivalent Ascendance, the very same from her technique, which lets her gain back the extra points. A maximum of 3 stack of Quadrivalent Ascendance can be obtained. Her second passive is a juicy one. When there are 1 or 2 nihility characters on the team other than Acheron herself, the damage dealt by all her attacks is increased by a percentage of the original damage, which is different from any kind of damage boost you get in the game. This one takes the final damage and increases by the amount mentioned here. It's a much bigger damage increase than any kind of damage boost you get from your supports or any kind of Lightcone. This will surely affect how we build teams around her. Finally, her third passive just increases her damage by 30% after the rain blade from her ultimate hits an enemy with Crimson Knot, stacking up to 3 times and lasts for 3 turns. So by the time she uses her final AoE attack, she will have 90% increased damage for 3 turns. And since the ultimate is considered an out of turn attack, with proper rotations you can keep the 90% damage boost indefinitely. Also, after she uses her final AoE attack, she additionally deals 6 extra hits to random targets, similar to Argenti's ultimate. In terms of her stat bonuses, after maxing out her traces, Acheron gets 28% attack, 24% crit damage, and 8% lightning damage boost. All are decent stats to have for a DPS. As for her trace priority, you want to level up her ultimate first, as it is the most important part of her kit, followed by her skill and talent. And lastly, her basic, which you can leave at level 1 as you won't be using it anyways. By the way, if you have reached to this point of the video and like what you are watching, consider subscribing to the channel, as it does help this channel grow and motivates me to make more content for you guys. Alright, it's time to talk about her Eidolons. Well, she is perfectly fine at E0, but if you do want to vertically invest in her, then the initial ones are pretty worth it. Her E1 increases her crit rate by 18% when dealing damage to debuff enemies, which will always be the case for her anyways. Her E2 is going to be the one you should be aiming for if you do want to pull for Eidolons. It reduces the number of Nihility characters needed to get the damage boost from her passive by 1. So now she only needs one other Nihility character to get the full benefit. Not only it makes her more versatile for team building, but it also allows her to use insane supports like Ruan Mei or Sparkle without losing the sustain spot. Also, when Acheron takes turn, she immediately gains 1 point of Slash Dream and inflicts 1 stack of Crimson Knot on the enemy with the highest stacks. This is great, as with a proper team, it will guarantee a 2-turn ultimate for her. Her E3 and E5 are just level ups for her traces. Her E4 makes all the enemies that enters combat take 8% more damage from her ultimate. There is no turn limit here. It's straight up an 8% vulnerability debuff that lasts indefinitely. Lastly, her E6 just makes her a god tier damage dealer who defies the game mechanics. It first gives her 20% rest penetration for her ultimate, which is already pretty good, but then all her basic and skill damage will be considered ultimate damage, and all the attacks will reduce toughness regardless of the element. This means at E6, she literally has Silverwolf's mechanic built into every single one of her attack. I always recommend having different characters to build for every element, but at E6, Acheron just becomes the all-rounder 1 DPS that can work in every situation. In terms of damage, of course her E6 just straight up ascends her to godhood, but when it comes to value, I would recommend her E2 at most, as it does enable a lot more team versatility for her and prevents her from being too reliant on specific characters. Now that we have discussed her entire kit, let's see how we can build her. Starting off with Relics, there are basically 2 choices here. The best is going to be the Pioneer of Deep Water set. It increases the damage against debuff enemies and increases crit rate and crit damage, all of which are great for Acheron. This set as of now provides the most value than any other option available. The Lightning set can be a close alternative, which you can use if you don't have good pieces of the Pioneer set. But the Pioneer set will also make her a bit more easier to build, as it does provide crit. The damage difference between these 2 sets depends on how well built your Acheron is. At lower investment with low crit ratio, the Pioneer set will perform exceptionally better than the Lightning set. But at higher investment with good crit ratio from substats, the Lightning set does catch up to the Pioneer set. Other options like Quantum set or the Musketeer set, I don't think they're worth it. They do provide good damage like the Quantum set, but the Pioneer set and the Lightning set will be my best recommendations. For ornaments, there is the new set that is coming in the next patch, the Divine Realm set. It increases attack and crit rate if you have more characters of the same path. It's pretty much built for Acheron. For alternatives, there are 2 options. There is the Glamour set for some attack and damage, then there is Inner Salsado that provides crit rate and ultimate damage. Both are similar in terms of value. From my calculations, Acheron scales really well with attack, so a set like the Space Sealing Station can also be a really good option. For main stats on the pieces, you wanna go with a crit body, a speed boost for most cases to reach that sweet 134 speed breakpoint, but you can also offer an attack boot if you are playing her with a character like Sparkle or Bronya. I'll elaborate more on this in the synergy section. For Sphere, both attack and damage boost work here. Since she already gets so much damage boost from her crit, that attack ends up being slightly better than a damage sphere, but the difference is not insanely high, so just pick one with better substats. Speaking of which, for substats, just aim for crit, attack and speed, just like any other DPS. But since she deals colorless damage through her ultimate, having a stat like break effect from here and there can also be decent on her, but don't specifically aim for that. After that, let's talk about her Lightcone options. One of the most interesting part of her kit, as she doesn't really have much options. Her signature is obviously her best in slot. Not only it gives her crit damage, but it also adds a debuff in her kit, like how Kafka's Lightcone does. This is really important since Acheron relies on points to get her ultimate, points that are gained by applying debuffs on the enemy. But having no application of debuff in her own kit is pretty disappointing. But with her signature Lightcone, she gets to apply a debuff, which increases her ultimate damage and makes her ultimate rotation much more smoother. The best 2 alternatives for this is going to be Goodnight Sleep Pill, which at higher superimposition level can give up to 72% damage boost, which is nothing to scoff at, or Incessant Rain, Silverwolf's Lightcone. This Lightcone not only provides some extra crit rate, but similar to her signature, adds a debuff to her kit, which further increases her damage, and that alone makes it a great option for her. Other than these 2, Welt's Lightcone can also work as a decent stat stick on her, as it does provide some damage and attack, but the attack is only for skill, which makes it a bit worse than other options. Kafka's Lightcone is pretty similar to Welt's Lightcone in terms of value, but it does add a debuff for Acheron, so it can be worth it if you don't have other options. Lastly, a Lightcone like Resurrection Shine can also work, but I would only recommend using it at higher superimposition level. Here is a simple damage chart showing the actual ranking of the Lightcones I just mentioned. The damage is calculated against 3 enemies without any external buffs. Overall, I personally recommend Good Night Sleep Well, even if you have just a single copy of it. Her signature is exceptionally good on her, and I'd recommend this over her E1 if you are planning to hyper invest in Acheron. There aren't a lot of DPS Lightcones for Nihility Path, but this will surely change as time goes on. For her rotations, Acheron is extremely different than any other character we have seen thus far. How you get her ultimate depends on how fast you can accumulate points, and to do that, you need constant application of debuffs, and that depends on her team. Normally for an E0 Acheron, you wanna mostly aim for a 2 to 3 turn ultimate rotation. To do this, you need to make sure that her allies always manage to inflict 2 debuffs every Acheron's turn. With this and her skill, she will get 3 points every turn, resulting in a 3 turn ultimate. But if you were to add out of turn attacks like ultimates or follow-up attack, or a preservation character with the Trends Lightcone, you can get a 2 turn ultimate with her sometimes, hence a 2 to 3 ultimate rotation. Of course, if you use her signature Lightcone or if you have her E2, then she mostly guarantees a 2 turn ultimate, but that depends on how much you invest in her. Now finally, let's talk about Acheron's potential synergies. Now just as how she doesn't really have a lot of good Lightcone options, when it comes to her teammates, she has most synergies with some 4-star characters, the best being Pella. She has a lot of things going for her. She has an AoE defense down, can apply debuffs with her skill, and if you have the Resolution Shine Lightcones, she can also apply it with her basics. That way she can be SP positive, and most of all, she's really easy to build. Everything just perfectly lines with Acheron's needs. As of right now, there is no one else that have this much synergy with Acheron. Other characters like Silverwolf is also great. Even though she is single target, the sheer amount of debuff application she has in every single one of her attack makes her a solid option. Some budget options like Gwenaifen can also work with her constant debuff application, but she doesn't really provide that much overall value. Lastly, a character like Welt can also work. Though he doesn't really apply a lot of debuff outside of his ultimate, giving him the Resolution Shine Lightcone will change that. For sustain options, anyone that can apply a debuff can work, especially shielders like Japar with his freeze, which gets even better if you give him the Trends Lightcone that burns the enemy when they attack the wearer. Also, the new upcoming characters like Gallagher and Aventurine have great synergies with Acheron, as both of them applies debuffs on the enemy, and that's what Acheron mostly wants. A proper team for E0 Acheron will look like this: Acheron with 2 other Nihility characters and a sustain. The characters that fit in these slots are these ones. Pella will always be a staple on any of her team because of how well she synergizes with Acheron. For the second slot, the best is mostly Silverwolf, but if you don't have her, a Welt or Gwenaifen can also work. For sustains, usually I'd recommend any shielder with the Trends Lightcone, but there is a really unique tech that can also work, and that is a sustain Welt. If you can use your Welt as a sustain, then you already fulfill the 2 Nihility slots, which allows her to use characters like Sparkle and Ruan-Mei, which then unlocks further possibilities, like using an attack boot rather than speed boots, which does result in a much higher damage output. But just how good this team is, building a team like this is just as much harder. For Welt alone, to make him work like a sustain, you want to make sure he's really fast. At least faster than any of the characters in the team. Then you need a decent amount of break effect on him, so that he can delay the enemy much further. And you want the event Lightcone. Tutorial mission starts. But you might not have that if you didn't play the event in 1.1. Not only this, you also need to make sure that your team is both fast and can deal enough damage to defeat the enemy before they defeat you. As Welt doesn't really stop the enemy from taking action, he only delays them. Seriously, there are a ton of points to cover. And sure, if you can cover all these points, then go for it. But most of the time, I'd only recommend going with a standard 2 Nihility and a sustain team, at least for an E0 Acheron. If you have her E2, then you can easily use characters like Sparkle with her with a proper sustain, as you won't need 2 Nihility characters with her. Lastly, if you want to play her in a dot team with characters like Kafka and Black Swan, it can work, as they provide more than enough dot application for Acheron to consistently get her ultimate. But to be frank, a team like this neither beats a dot team of Kafka, Black Swan and Ruan-Mei, nor it performs insanely better than any other standard Acheron team. So it's not worth it to downgrade your already busted dot team just to play them with Acheron. These are all the team options that I can think of, but you guys can also share any other ideas that you might have. Overall, Acheron is an incredible damage dealer. Regardless of her limitations about Lightcones and teams, as of now, she has probably the highest damage output in the game. A lot of players are concerned about her not being able to use Premier Harmony characters like Ruan-Mei and Sparkle at E0, but given the amount of self-damage boost she gets from her kit, I don't think she desperately needs the extra support. All in all, I think she's a great character, and it's totally worth it if you need a good damage dealer for your account. These are all my thoughts, but I would also love to hear your opinions on Acheron, or if you'll be pulling for her in your account. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.